You know what's interesting about people who have been through things most people can't imagine? They don't always come out broken. Sometimes they come out sharper. Not sharper in the way that wins arguments, sharper in the way that sees things. The person who senses what someone is feeling before that person has sorted it out themselves. The person who scans a room and registers every micro-tension, every half-hidden sadness, every unspoken hierarchy, all within the first 5 seconds of walking in. The person who stays calm while the world around them unravels, not because they don't care, but because chaos is familiar. It has a shape they recognize. But here's what most people get wrong. They call this intuition. They call it being observant. They call it having good instincts. And they never ask the question that actually matters: where did you learn to see this clearly? And the strange part is, some of the traits that helped them survive can later look like intelligence. There isn't a formal psychological diagnosis called traumatic intelligence, but the idea describes something real, a fascinating pattern of heightened awareness, pattern recognition, and emotional sensitivity that can develop after early adversity. It's not a clinical label. It's a way of naming a set of adaptations. Here's the general idea researchers have explored. When a child grows up in an environment that is unpredictable, emotionally volatile, physically unsafe, or simply inconsistent in ways that can't be rationalized, their brain doesn't just cope. It adapts. Chronic stress and early adversity can influence how the brain processes threat, emotion, and social information, including brain regions tied to threat detection and social prediction. Researchers are still working out exactly how and how much this varies person to person. But the broad pattern is well studied. The result is not damage, at least not only damage. The result in many people is a nervous system that learned, without anyone's permission, to read rooms, predict moods, detect micro-expressions, and think several steps ahead, not as a skill, but as a survival mechanism. This is not the kind of intelligence that shows up on IQ tests. It doesn't help you solve math equations faster or memorize facts. But it does something more complex. It teaches you to understand people at a level most people never access. And it does this so early, so deeply, that you don't even realize you have it. You just assume everyone sees what you see. They don't. Here are 11 signs of this pattern adaptations, not superpowers that you may recognize in yourself. Sign 1. You developed an unusually sensitive threat detection system. You have probably never experienced what other people describe as truly relaxing. Not completely, not all the way. There's a baseline hum that never quite leaves a quiet alertness, a scanning. Even when you're alone, even when everything is objectively fine. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. It tends to develop when the brain learns early that safety isn't guaranteed, that the environment can shift without warning, that you need to be ready. Here's the trade-off. That same hypervigilance, when it isn't overwhelming you, is also what lets you notice things the half-second hesitation before someone says they're happy for you. The tension in a room that hasn't been named yet. The shift in someone's energy before they've processed it themselves. Your nervous system was trained to scan for threat, and one side effect is that you pick up on data other people filter out, not because you're inherently more perceptive, but because your brain didn't get the luxury of filtering it out in the first place. The cost, a tiredness that isn't physical. The upside, you notice what others walk past. Think about the last time you walked into a party or a family dinner. Most people scan for who to talk to. You scan for who's uncomfortable, who's forcing a laugh, which two people aren't making eye contact. You clock the exits too, sometimes without meaning to which chair puts your back to the wall. Which door is closest? None of this is a decision you make. It's already done by the time you sit down. That's the hum. It never fully turns off, even at something as ordinary as dinner. Sign 2. You notice what someone is hiding before they know they're hiding it. This one is about the signal, not the story behind it. You don't just notice surface emotions. You notice the gap between what someone is saying and what their body is broadcasting in that exact moment, the false note in a compliment, the anger beneath a smile, the insecurity dressed up as confidence. And you don't do this deliberately. It happens automatically, beneath conscious awareness, in real time. Researchers who study children raised in emotionally unpredictable homes describe something they call enhanced threat cue detection kids, who learn to track a caregiver's mood because the atmosphere of the home could shift without warning. In adulthood, that same ability can look like emotional intelligence, like you can see through people. The difficult part is that you can become highly confident in what you notice, even when your interpretation isn't always complete. Reading a signal accurately and reading the whole story accurately aren't the same thing. That's worth holding on to, because carrying conclusions about people that you didn't ask to form even accurate ones is its own kind of loneliness. You felt this in ordinary conversations. Someone says I'm fine and you hear the half-beat pause before it, the way their eyes drop for a fraction of a second. You don't ask them about it, most of the time, because you've learned that pointing it out rarely goes well. So you just carry it a small, private piece of knowledge about someone that they didn't hand you on purpose. Sign 3. Chaos doesn't rattle you. Calm does. When everything falls apart, a crisis, an emergency, a moment where other people freeze, something in you goes quiet and strategic. Your thinking sharpens. But when things are calm and stable, that's when restlessness starts, when anxiety with no obvious source begins to surface. This connects to something researchers call stress inoculation. When a developing brain is exposed to manageable levels of stress, not trauma that overwhelms, but difficulty that can be navigated, it can build efficient pathways for responding to future stress. This is an important distinction. It doesn't mean trauma makes people stronger, and it shouldn't be confused with severe or chronic trauma, which tends to have the opposite effect. The specific pattern here is about manageable, survivable stress, teaching the nervous system that hard things are survivable. The paradox is this. You may find yourself unusually functional in situations that overwhelm other people, but real sustained peace can feel foreign, like waiting. Your nervous system may not trust it, because historically calm was just the space between storms. That's not a flaw. It's a system that hasn't been told the storm is over. You've probably seen this play out at work. Something goes wrong, a system crashes, a deal falls apart. Someone panics in a meeting, and you're the one who gets quiet and clear while everyone else scrambles. Colleagues remember it. They call you great under pressure. What they don't see is the following week, when everything's calm and on schedule, and you're the one who can't quite settle, looking for the next problem before it exists. Sign 4. You learned to read people without ever choosing to. Where sign 2 is about catching the signal in the moment. This one is about understanding why the signal is there in the first place. Most people take human behavior at face value. Someone is angry, they assume the anger is about right now. Someone is distant, they assume the person is cold. You may not have had that luxury. You learned early that what people show and what's actually happening aren't always the same thing. So you became a student of the people around you, their patterns, their triggers, their inconsistencies. You do this instinctively now, and it's made you understanding sometimes to your own detriment, because seeing the wound behind someone's behavior can make it harder to hold them accountable for the harm they cause. But what you've developed is real. You don't just see behavior. You see the pattern underneath it. That's not just intuition, that's pattern recognition trained by necessity. It shows up in how you talk about people, even people who've hurt you. You'll catch yourself explaining someone's cruelty instead of just naming it. He does that because no one ever showed him another way. She controls everything because she grew up with nothing she could control. Friends sometimes find this frustrating, like you're making excuses. You're not. You're just incapable of seeing behavior without also seeing where it came from. The work, for a lot of people like this, is learning that understanding someone's history doesn't obligate you to keep absorbing their present-day behavior. Sign 5. You built yourself because no one else was going to. You're fiercely self-reliant. You don't wait to be rescued. When something needs doing, you do it quietly, often without telling anyone. From the outside, this can look like you don't need anyone, but it's less about not needing people, and more about having learned early that depending on others was unreliable. This is sometimes described as internalized resourcefulness, common in people who grew up where support was inconsistent or conditional. The upside is real competence. The cost worth naming: you got so good at surviving alone that you sometimes forget you don't have to. Asking for help not because you're incapable, but because you're human, can still be one of the hardest things you do. You've probably noticed the pattern in small moments. Your car breaks down, and your first instinct isn't to call someone, it's to start figuring out how to fix it yourself, or quietly find a way around the problem. A deadline moves up, and instead of telling your team you're drowning, you just work later and say nothing. Even in relationships, you can be the one everyone leans on without anyone realizing you rarely lean back. It's not that you don't want support, it's that some part of you never fully believed it would be there, so you stopped budgeting for it. If these first 5 signs are landing somewhere, that's worth sitting with. This pattern is documented across psychological research, even without a single formal name for it. Recognizing it in yourself is the first step toward doing something intentional with it. Drop the number that hit hardest. I read every comment. Here's the rest. Sign 6. You feel things at a volume most people have on mute. You don't just experience emotions, you absorb them. A kind gesture from a stranger can bring you to tears. Injustice doesn't just bother you, it sits in your body. Other people seem to feel something and let it go. You don't always understand how they do that. Early adversity can influence how the brain and nervous system process emotional signals, although the effects vary considerably from person to person. You likely weren't born too sensitive for many people. The nervous system gets tuned this way by an environment that demanded high alertness. The same sensitivity that makes you ache at things others ignore is often what lets you create, connect, and understand suffering in ways that make you genuinely kind. Same instrument, both notes. It's the stranger holding a door with a tired smile that stays with you all day. It's watching the news and feeling a story about someone you'll never meet sit in your chest for hours. People around you move on from things quickly: an argument, a sad scene in a film, a hard conversation, and you're still turning it over that night, not because you're dwelling, but because your system genuinely doesn't process things at that speed. Sign 7. Your trust isn't given. It's earned slowly. You don't trust easily, not with your inner world, not with the version of yourself that isn't performing. You can be liked by a room and still feel unknown in it. Other people seem to open up quickly and assume goodwill. For you, trust is a door that opens slowly, after tests other people don't know they're taking. This is sometimes called adaptive skepticism, not paranoia, but a calibrated response from a brain that learned early that not every smile is safe, that words don't always match actions. The result? Fewer connections, but the ones you form tend to be real. You're not incapable of connection, you're just unwilling to pretend it exists where it doesn't. You've probably watched yourself do this in real time. Someone new comes into your life, says all the right things, and you nod along while quietly running a background check nobody asked for. Do their actions match their words next week, next month, under pressure? Most people call this being guarded. It isn't guardedness for its own sake. It's a test protocol built by experience, and it only closes once someone passes it consistently, not once. Notice something about the signs so far. None of them are really about other people. They're about a nervous system that learned to work overtime, and a mind that learned to compensate for a world that didn't feel safe to trust at face value. The next few signs go a layer deeper into how that same wiring shapes the way you relate to time, to the future, and to yourself. Sign 8. You often sense where things are headed early. You meet someone and quickly get a sense of how things might go, not because you're cynical, but because your brain has picked up on signals that take other people longer to register. Sometimes you're right, because you've become genuinely sensitive to patterns most people miss. But prediction is still prediction, not certainty, and it's worth holding your read of a situation loosely rather than treating it as fact. Being told you're negative or overly analytical is common when you voice these instincts early. It doesn't mean the instinct itself is wrong, but it also doesn't mean it's infallible. Maybe you've watched a friend's new relationship from a distance and known, weeks before they did, which habit was going to become the breaking point. Maybe you've sat in a work meeting and clocked which part of the plan nobody wants to say out loud will fail. You've probably learned to soften how you say this out loud. Because I have a bad feeling about this lands better than I already know how this ends, even when, privately, you do have a fairly clear picture. Sign 9. Stillness can feel like a threat your body hasn't unlearned. When things go genuinely quiet, something in you can tense a background hum of unease. Sitting still without a task can feel harder than it should. Vacations exhaust you in ways that are hard to explain. Even meditation can make the noise louder because it removes the distractions that usually keep the hum at bay. This is often described as an autonomic nervous system that learned, early, that stillness could precede danger, so it never fully stood down. In a life that may now be genuinely safe, the old wiring can still be running. Understanding that not forcing yourself to relax, but recognizing the system isn't broken, just outdated, is often where things start to shift. This is the person who fills a quiet Sunday with errands that don't need doing, who feels a strange guilt lying on the couch with nothing planned, who checks their phone during a movie not out of boredom but because stillness itself starts to feel loud. If that's you, it's worth noticing that the discomfort isn't really about the free time. It's about what free time used to mean. The last two signs are less about how you survived and more about what surviving left you with. Sign 10. The adversity gave you a lens, not just a wound. Most people who experience hardship carry it purely as weight. For some people, adversity also becomes a way of seeing an understanding of suffering that isn't theoretical, because it lived in their home, their body, their early memories. That proximity, painful as it was, can also build the capacity to sit with someone else's pain without flinching, without rushing to fix it. Researchers Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun named this post-traumatic growth. Their work has found that a meaningful portion of people who go through significant adversity don't just recover some report deeper relationships, clearer priorities, and a stronger sense of meaning afterward. This isn't universal or automatic, and it doesn't make the adversity worth it. It just means the wound and the way of seeing aren't always separable. You can probably feel this in how you show up for people in crisis. When a friend is falling apart, you're not the one who panics or disappears or rushes to say something reassuring just to make the discomfort stop. You sit there. You let it be as bad as it is. People often tell you afterward that you were the only one who didn't try to fix it, and that not fixing it was exactly what they needed. That's not a skill you were taught in a course. It's something you learned by needing it yourself, once, when no one did it for you. Sign 11. You can't sustain a life that feels meaningless. Some people can tolerate a job or a life that means nothing if the conditions are otherwise fine. If that's never worked for you, it may not be idealism, it may be the logical endpoint of a mind trained by difficulty to notice deeply and feel intensely. When you've had to make sense of chaos just to get through a day, meaning stops being a luxury and starts being a kind of orientation, a way of telling which way is up. For a lot of people who've been through adversity, purpose isn't something they add to life once the basics are covered. It's closer to load-bearing. Take it away and the whole structure starts to feel unsteady, even when nothing on the surface has changed. That's why a job that pays well but feels empty, or a relationship that looks fine but says nothing, can quietly wear you down in a way it doesn't seem to wear other people down. It's not that you're harder to satisfy. It's that your nervous system learned early to distinguish between what's survivable and what's actually worth surviving for, and it never really unlearned the difference. Surface-level living doesn't just feel unsatisfying to a mind like that. It feels unsustainable. What's interesting about all 11 of these is how consistently they're misread. The person who can't fully relax looks anxious. The one who sees through people looks judgmental. The one who stays calm in chaos looks detached. The one who trusts slowly looks cold. But sometimes what looks like a collection of quiet difficulties is a set of adaptations built early, for real reasons, that came at a real cost. None of these signs exist in isolation either. They tend to travel together, reinforcing each other. The hypervigilance feeds the pattern recognition feeds the slow trust feeds the self-reliance. It's one system, not 11 separate traits. And that's usually why, if a few of these signs have landed, most of the rest probably have too. If one of these signs put words to something you've never been able to explain, leave that number in the comments. And remember, the goal isn't to become grateful for what hurt you. It's to decide what you want to do with what you learned from surviving it. See you in the next one.